Welcome everyone. My name is Rowan Peth, Executive Director of the Australian Chamber of Commerce in South Korea. I would like to begin by acknowledging traditional custodians of the lands of each of us are joining from and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I also extend a very warm welcome to all our participants and attendees who are joining us from across the region. In celebrating International Women's Day, it is my honour to introduce today's event, Choose the Challenge, exploring women's leadership in Australia and Korea with our event partners, the Australian Embassy in Seoul and also Asialink Business. Like many organisations, AustCham Korea has made a conscious effort over the years to increase diversity and equality from within. With today being a day to celebrate these achievements, we understand there is a long way to go for both Australia and Korea. To explore today's topic, we are joined by four very distinguished and experienced guest speakers from across the region, who will be on hand to provide their insights and thoughts on today's topic. Now, to introduce guest speakers and today's session, may I pass it over to our moderator, Jo Billing, Vice Chair of the Australian Chamber of Commerce in South Korea and Co-CEO of JOST & Co.
Thank you, Rowan. It's great to be here on International Women's Day, where across the globe, communities are celebrating the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. It's also a day that marks a call to action for accelerating women's equality. International Women's Day has occurred for well over a century, with the first IWD gathering in 1911, supported by over 1 million people. When I was trying to describe the concept of International Women's Day to my two young daughters this weekend, it was quite challenging, as their innocent minds simply asked, but why wouldn't girls and boys just be treated the same? And why do we need to work to make that happen? How can we change it? So let's discuss women's equality in the context of Australia and the Republic of Korea to see if you guys can help me answer that simple question more eloquently. Both countries we're discussing today are at varying stages of workplace gender equality and have a lot to learn from each other. While Korea has seen slow societal change despite legislative attempts to reduce gendered inequality, Australia has seen a decrease in global equity rankings and a stagnation of gender equality progress due to a newfound reliance on voluntary initiatives over guiding legislation. We are here today to discuss how the two countries both align and differ in legislative and societal change. Overlaid with that is the impact of COVID-19 on women, both in the workplace and at home. There have been a number of studies released recently with some pretty confronting statistics. So I'll stop talking and introduce you to the experts. I'm privileged to be joined by four very impressive women today. Firstly, Her Excellency Catherine Raper, the Australian Ambassador to the Republic of Korea. Ambassador Raper is a senior career officer with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, having most recently headed the COVID-19 Coordination Unit. Prior to that, she was First Assistant Secretary, Europe and Latin America Division, and has previously served overseas as head of post in Taipei, and earlier in Washington, The Hague, and the Australian Permanent Mission to the World Trade Organization, Geneva. Ambassador Raper has recently taken up the post of Australian Ambassador to the Republic of Korea, having arrived here at the start of the year. Thank you for joining us, Ambassador. Next, we have Penny Burt. Penny is the Group CEO of Asialink, Australia's leading centre for creative engagement with Asia, hosted by the University of Melbourne. Prior to leading Asialink, Penny has held senior executive roles within the Asia-Pacific region at both Visa and McKinsey & Company. Penny is a former diplomat and represented Australia at a senior level in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and at the United Nations in Geneva and New York. She has also served as an advisor to the Australian Minister for Foreign Affairs. She's volunteered and served on the boards of numerous non-government organisations in Asia, the US and Australia, including 7 years as a governor of the Singapore Institute of International Relations and Board Agenda, Singapore's Women's Board Advocacy Organisation. Welcome, Penny. Also joining us is Sandra Park, the Chief Representative in Korea for Woodside Energy. Prior to Woodside Energy, Sandra has held a number of senior executive roles with Samsung Heavy Industries. Throughout her career, she has worked on global oil and gas projects across multiple countries, including Australia, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Mozambique, truly navigating a traditionally male-dominated industry across a number of cultures. Thank you for joining us, Sandra. We also have Helen Oh with us today. Helen's a Trade and Investment Commissioner and Counsellor based here in Seoul with Austrade. Prior to joining Austrade, Helen led the New South Wales State Government Market Development and International Engagement Program for Korea and Japan. Helen's an active member of the Future Leaders Program, facilitated by the Australia-Korea Business Council and the Australia-Japan Business Cooperation Committee. She was also one of the Asialink's 40 under 40 most influential Asian Australians last year. As well as this, she represented Australia in amateur and professional golf from the years 2000 to 2010. Welcome, Helen, and thank you for all our panellists in joining us today. So before I pass to this impressive group of panellists, we're really interested in what you're keen to discuss as an audience today, given we're covering a pretty broad topic. Right now, you'll see on the screen, as we come up, a QR code that will take you to a question on Slido. There will also be a note in the chat that will say, which will take you to a link, and you can join it if you just enter the event code Women Leadership. You'll see a question there which says, what topics and themes are you most excited about discussing at today's event? We'd love to hear some of your thoughts around which direction you'd like to take the next hour. So please enter your thoughts and your input into what you would like to see. We won't share that right now because we'll move to the panelists, but we'll come back and discuss what you've said. Okay, so now that we're all warmed up, let's go to our panel, which you've been waiting for. So the theme for International Women's Day this year, as Rowan said, is Choose to Challenge, where we believe a challenged world is an alert world, and from challenge comes change. Ambassador Raper, I'll pass to you first for some opening comments and for you to share your thoughts on what choosing to challenge means to you.
Hello, hopefully everyone can hear me. Thank you very much, Jo, for that kind introduction. It's an absolute pleasure to join today's discussion on International Women's Day about the important theme of Choose to Challenge. As Jo mentioned, I am Australia's ambassador to the Republic of Korea. I've recently arrived, having started in this job in mid-January, and I have the honour of being Australia's first female ambassador to the Republic of Korea, a role and a platform that I plan to take very seriously. So I think it's fair to say that we're all on a journey towards gender equality and that no country has it all worked out. Certainly in Australia, we've made a great deal of progress towards gender equality and we have a lot that we can be justifiably proud of. But we still have work to do and lessons to learn, and I think that's going to be an important part of today's discussion, sharing how Australia and Korea can work together towards our shared goal. And that is a society where all genders can contribute to their full potential. I think it's also true to say, and I'm sure we'll come back to this theme today, that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a disproportionate effect on women and girls, and unfortunately threatens to undermine some of the hard-won gender equality gains of recent years. But in saying that, we're not without options. At the national level, we can ensure economic strategies and budgeting respond to the needs of women, and we can ensure that our policies are supported by sound sex disaggregated data. By doing this, we can help ensure that women participate meaningfully in the economic and health recovery from COVID-19, with results that are both sustainable and inclusive. We can also start very much in our own workplaces in playing a part in this. And it's important to make sure that we are setting in place inclusive practices that support social norms and behaviours. Today, for example, the Australian Embassy here launched our first Women in Leadership Action Plan, drawing on input and consultations right across our embassy team to create a document on women in leadership and gender equality that we can measure and acknowledge our progress against. This builds on a wider program of the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, who has had a women in leadership strategy in place for the last 6 years, which has been achieving some good results. We refreshed this policy last year and have been doing things such as unconscious bias training to make sure that we are being much more conscious in making our decisions on issues to do with staff and promotion practices to ensure continued progress towards gender equality. Also today, the Australian Embassy has launched a short video on Instagram where our staff members have pledged to stand up and challenge inequality. So if you don't already follow the Australian Embassy on Instagram or any of the other social media platforms, take a look. It's quite a powerful video, I hope you'll agree. And we're planning to do some more material on our social media to ensure we continue to keep gender equality at the top of people's minds and spark a conversation and be part of that. One important element I think it'd be useful to touch on today is a very clear connection between having more women in leadership in our business community and the positive impact that has on business outcomes. For example, recent research in Australia by our Workplace Gender Equality Agency, together with Curtin University, this is a report called Gender Equity Insights 2020, Delivering the Business Outcomes, found that a 10% increase in the share of female top-tier managers led to a 6.6% increase in the market value of Australian ASX listed companies. Now that's equivalent to about 104.7 million Australian dollars. So it shows that gender equality makes good sense at many different levels, including the business bottom line. Another point that I'd like to stress today is the importance of role models. Now, as I mentioned, as Australia's first female ambassador here in Seoul, I very much see this as an important platform to reach out to other women, to emerging leaders, to female leaders here in the community, to make sure that we are lighting the way and showing the path for other women to follow in leadership roles in the future. So I'm looking forward to hearing from our panellists today about the powerful role that women can play as we look at and beyond our recovery from COVID-19, and to learn more about the challenges and opportunities facing both Australia and the Republic of Korea in the area of gender equality. I'll leave it there. I look forward to taking questions and sharing views with our other panellists. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ambassador. Penny, I'll throw to you next. Asialink have just released a report today, actually, entitled Empowering Women in Innovation Leaders in Australia and Southeast Asia. The report uncovered some fascinating insights on the impact of COVID-19 on women within the region and how enhancing women's participation in innovation will be critical as part of the recovery path. I know you'll discuss some of the findings of this report later, but could you first share some personal insights given your experience in Australia and Asia? Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. So thank you very much for the opportunity to join you today. Let me start also by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from where I am joining you today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. It's a fantastic opportunity to be able to step in and discuss some of these issues today. Because I choose to challenge on International Women's Day by using the opportunity that's been given to me, not just today, but across my career, to highlight some of the important challenges that we are facing on the journey to gender equality and women's leadership, and actually to not only just be a catalyst for change myself, but help have these conversations in a way that ignites the kind of change that we all want to see going forward. So just as framing for today's discussion, I really wanted to briefly paint a picture of some of the challenges facing women in the workforce in Korea and Australia, and touch on some of the ways that COVID has accelerated those challenges, drawing on the report that you've just highlighted that we released today on women in innovation. And through the rest of the conversation, pick up some of the really important points that the ambassador has just made about some of the useful policy directions and personal initiatives that we can take. So first of all, without getting boring with the data, in case you actually didn't notice, in both Australia and Korea, there are far fewer women participating in the workplace than men. And women are far more likely to be concentrated in part-time and casual work than their male counterparts. Women actually hold fewer leadership positions than men in the corporate sector in both countries, and actually in politics as well. In Korea, fewer than 20% of managerial posts are held by women, and women are less than 3% of executives and corporate board members. In Australia, women hold around 36% of managerial positions. They're 17% of CEOs and around 30% of board members. As the ambassador said, that's taken a long time and is the result of a lot of hard work, including in the policy sphere. In both Australia and Korea, there is a significant gender pay gap. To put it simply, men continue to earn more than women. In the ROK, the pay gap is about 35%. In Australia, it's around 14%. For the audience today, if we look at the pay gap in Australia, another way of thinking about that is that in Australia, women have to work 56 days more in a year to earn the same amount as their male counterparts. That can be a bit exhausting. As the ambassador has highlighted, sadly, COVID has actually accelerated some of the challenges facing women and women's leadership in the workplace. While it's really early days, the data suggests that COVID-19 could have set back some of the amazing progress that's already been made. In our new report released today, we share that women have been twice as likely as men to lose their roles, their jobs, their economic security during COVID. That's because they disproportionately tend to be, as I said earlier, in part-time and casual work, also concentrated in retail, hospitality, and sectors that have been most vulnerable to the impacts of COVID, including economic lockdown. Also, on a sad note, women's share of unpaid work and care work during the pandemic has been as high as 90% in some parts of Asia. Domestic violence against women has escalated, and 2/3 of women across the Asia Pacific have reported mental health issues. I'm going to stop there and say I'm really looking forward to a conversation today, not about how challenging the situation is, but what are some of the things that we can do collectively and individually in our organizations and in our countries to address some of those challenges. And in particular, I'm really interested in talking about the innovation agenda as we move to a phase of what we hope will be sustainable and inclusive recovery post-COVID. Thank you, Jo.
Great, thanks, Penny. And I think that's a really important point to note. It's about let's not reflect, but let's be proactive and work out together how we can come up with some great actions. Sandra, we'd love to hear about your story next. Working obviously in a male-dominated industry for both Australian and Korean companies. Can you share a bit of your experience and insight?
First of all, it is my pleasure to be invited to today's event. My name is Sandra Park. I'm Chief Representative of Woodside in Korea. I have worked in the energy industry for my entire career. Women's participation in the oil and gas sector is less than 22%, much below than that of the broader economy. Prior to joining Woodside, I was in the shipbuilding industry where women participation is less than 5%. Women in the senior leadership position in the shipbuilding industry was less than 1%. In such environment, gender equality is often overlooked. Therefore, sharing ideas, speaking up as a woman, I could initiate bringing differences to the workplaces. I have proposed a number of different ideas which could help me to continue my business development career when I had a newborn child and 2 children at the time. But these days, emerging young leaders in the industry still benefit from some of the system and programs that I have initiated in the sector. Still, as a working mother with 2 children, a number of systems at Woodside I found it very helpful, helping me to perform my position in Korea. One of it is flexible working hours. Woodside has also rolled out a new inclusion and diversity strategy, which will bring people's awareness to provide equal opportunities at workplace, so every individual, whether it's male or female, can display its best capabilities. I believe bringing all talents, including that of women, to deliver a secure and sustainable energy is very vital for this energy transition period. Inclusion and diversity will help the economy as a whole to drive more innovative and inclusive solutions for the future. And as I mentioned, the female senior leaders have a bigger role to speak up, and I believe that's one critical action to make a difference for the women in the future.
Great. Thank you so much, Sandra. We look forward to hearing more of your insights. It's a fascinating story. Helen, you've got some really unique insights given your background in both Korea and Australia, and a professional who knows both the Australian and Korean cultures well. Could you share some of your reflections and insights after your first few months working in Korea?
Thanks, Jo, and a pleasure to be joining this panel of such distinguished experts in this area. And for me, in preparation for this event, I thought about what does choosing to challenge mean for me? And I think for me, it's not about a point in time, but it's actually about who I am, you know, a person who was born in Seoul, moved to Australia when I was 10 with my family, and then the Australian government actually gave me my permanent residency and citizenship to represent Australia in Gulf. Now I'm representing Australia at another capacity. And as an emerging leader who's benefited a lot from a long line of strong, brave men and women leaders who have gone before me, who are there before me, who have challenged the historical gender inequalities and social biases across the world, but mostly in Australia and in Korea. I see that now I carry the responsibility to continue this legacy and keep progressing the society and relationships around me to build on the progress and not lose what's been achieved over the last 40 to 50 years, particularly through unique challenges of our time and my generation, such as working through the unprecedented social and economic challenges coming out of COVID. This is important for me because in my current role as Trade and Investment Commissioner and Commercial Counsellor in Austrade and in the Australian Embassy in Seoul, I face challenges every day because of who I am. As a relatively younger Asian Australian woman in a leadership position in Korea. We've already touched on some really helpful data points and quantitative measures coming out of COVID and impact on women. I thought I'd bring to the table some of my personal experience and some data points from that. I've been in my role for 7 weeks now, and I've taken 31 external business meetings so far. Out of those, only 6 of those meetings have been with a female counterpart, so only about 20%. In 25 of those meetings, my counterpart was a male executive, government representative, major buyers, exporting business owners in Australia, and decision makers. In many of these meetings, given this nature, I have to earn my place in the boardroom and earn their respect throughout the course of our meetings. I was once mistaken as an executive assistant, showing my superiors into a boardroom and nearly had the boardroom door closed on me. And in fact, it was a meeting I was meant to chair. So I had to quickly put my foot in the door and wedge my way in and make my way to the head of the table to see through the meeting. Sometimes it takes a while for my business counterparts to directly address me in meetings because I think they're not too sure and they don't expect me to be in a position that I am. In Australia, if something like this was to happen, I would probably speak up straight away and rectify the situation immediately. In Korea, it's a work in progress for me as I navigate through the cultural nuances and as I settle into my role. In that instance where I had to wedge my foot in the door, I chose to not challenge the situation straight away because it was an awkward enough meeting as it was. But I chose to call my counterpart following the meeting to thank him for his time, but also to politely explain that that situation at the beginning of the meeting made me feel very uncomfortable, and could we please make sure that never happens again. I'm hoping more discussions like today's will help us get to a 50-50 split as opposed to 80-20 split as it is for me and for my successors in this position. And I'm doing what I can to win allies one meeting at a time. Given the benefits we've already talked about, having more women in senior leadership positions, leading to improved productivity and bottom line, it's really a no-brainer. Greater gender equality in business communities in Australia and in Korea will help us recover more quickly from COVID and help us to develop a stronger bilateral partnership. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Helen. I think you're going to have lots of stories to share in the next year or two. Now, before we throw to the panel for some questions, I'm just going to share the results of the question that we asked you, so we know that what you're interested in hearing as we work through some of those questions. So we asked you what topics and themes are you most excited about. So as you can see, a diverse range, which is good to see diversity, but we want to hear about some of the results of the DFAT's gender strategy, some key challenges, what equality means, obviously leadership, some data, support measures, strategies for challenging and changing gendered stereotypes, being a working mum, some personal stories, and some of Woodside's initiatives to support women in Korea. So there's quite a few things to cover in the next 34 minutes. So panel, just be mindful that's what the audience would like to hear about, and what men can do to uplift women in the workplace as well, which is an interesting one. So I think with that, people are still adding things. So feel free to keep adding sort of comments into that, and we'll try and sort of navigate our way through and address some of those themes. But always please put a question in the Q&A tab as well if there's specific questions that you want to ask the panel as well. So with that, one of the questions that I think we had for you, Ambassador, was obviously you mentioned you're the first ever woman to take up the role of Australian Ambassador to Korea. And there's a couple of questions around the DFAT policies and agendas to try and increase women leaders. So you talked about the Women in Leadership policy. Is there any specific policies or programs that are in place that you've been involved in, and how has DFAT achieved more and more females at senior levels?
Thank you, Jo, and it's really good to see interest in the DFAT Women in Leadership strategy, which I personally feel has been a great success, while also acknowledging that there is still work to do. So effectively, this policy looked at the real reasons why we didn't have sufficient women in our leadership positions. So this was particularly defined as women in our senior executive roles. This is our senior managers at different levels, and also our female ambassadors and high commissioners overseas. So a number of very practical measures were taken, and that included, as I mentioned earlier, unconscious bias training. So encouraging those making the decisions on those appointments to really reflect on whether they were being sufficiently inclusive in their decision making. It also included having a bigger call out for more applicants, so encouraging women to put themselves forward for these roles. And it also involved offering more flexible work options, in particular an if not, why not policy, which made a flexible working environment the norm, with reasons having to be given why that couldn't work in a particular role or position rather than the other way around. We also set ourselves some targets. So we didn't go for a quota approach. We chose to set ourselves some stretch targets, and these targets were set back in 2015. And I'm pleased to say that we've met all of these targets, which seemed quite remarkable at the time. And these were to have at least 43% at our SES Band 1 level, which is our first senior management level, and then to have 40% at our next level, at our SES Band 2 level. And in fact, we overachieved that target by now having 52.5% of our senior managers at that level female. In our ambassadors level cohort, we're now at 40% of female ambassadors. So still more work to do here, and certainly I feel that here in Seoul. I'm Australia's first female ambassador, as I mentioned, and we've been celebrating the fact that we now have 18 female ambassadors here in Seoul, but that's out of 157 ambassadors. So there's still clearly some work to be done to get to something approaching equity. It's also the case that we have set in place a very firm 40-40-20 rule, which is we're looking for any event, any panel, any forum, any initiative to involve 40% men, 40% women, and 20% of any gender. And that's working quite well as a way to try and drive having more inclusive outcomes right across the system. So finally, I'll just mention we had a refresh of this policy just in the last year, and we've now adopted 3 pillars to take this work forward. One of them is inclusive by design, which is making sure that every program that we develop actually incorporates women in leadership into the agenda. The other one is, the next one is having accountable, inclusive leadership. And that's making sure that everyone at every leadership level sees it as part of their role to continue to take forward this agenda. And the other one is our women in leadership at our overseas embassies. And that's expanding many of those approaches that I just talked about to our overseas posting environment, which is important not only for how we perform internally as an organisation, but making sure we actually live the approaches that we put forward globally. So Australia is a very active proponent of women and girls issues internationally and women leadership. So we want to make sure that we're also living that in how we portray ourselves overseas. So I'll stop there, Jo, but certainly would welcome other questions. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Ambassador. Anyone else on the panel, Helen, Penny or Sandra, in terms of some of the initiatives or programs that you've seen in your organisations that have been really successful in terms of elevating women in leadership? Feel free to jump in.
I might quickly jump in there and add to what the ambassador referred to as the embassy-wide initiative and DFAT-wide initiative as well. In Austrade, we also have a target to get to 50% of the senior executive positions filled by women. And that was a target that was set back in 2018, and I understand we are very close to achieving that target. I'm also, women in leadership topic and the capabilities and skills is an ongoing pursuit for me. So I'm actually participating in Austrade run Women in Leadership course next week, a 6-week-long course where we connect with 30 other women in leadership across our onshore and offshore offices. And that goes back to what the ambassador referred to as having a good mentor, role models and support network. And for me, as I troubleshoot some of the situations in Korea as an Australian diplomat, I think I'll find that really helpful.
Great, thanks, Helen. Penny, what about across Asialink? What are some of the more successful initiatives, legislation or programs you've seen in various countries?
It's really interesting, Jo. I think rather than speaking about Asialink per se, because we're in the really fortunate position where we are enormously diverse and have more than gender balance. Actually, we're over 60% women and 65% culturally diverse. So yes, we're doing great. But as we look across the sort of policies and practices in the region at the sort of government level that have led to greater focus on women's leadership, I'd really call out 3 things, I think, that are kind of game changers often at the national level. The first sounds a little bit obvious, but it's not. It's actually having senior political leadership put women's leadership on the economic agenda as being an important driver of economic success. And, you know, we often see in countries across the region that there is a minister for women, but it's always a woman. Can't think of any male ministers for women's affairs. And we see the question of women's leadership being dealt with as a social policy issue rather than core to long-term economic success. And we do know that increasing women's participation in the workforce across the region and country by country will actually deliver incredible outcomes in terms of the contribution to GDP. So I think that's one really important thing. The second is actually requiring our companies to be accountable for diversity. And that happens in many different ways, but some of the countries who've been most successful in driving a greater focus on women's representation in the corporate sector have actually required companies to, we used to call it report or explain, but actually that's another way of saying track their data and share their data and be accountable actually publicly as publicly listed companies for what they do. The third thing I think, and this is quite a new thing, and it's something that we're very focused on in Asialink, is understanding and taking a gender lens to the question of economic recovery. And the ambassador mentioned this in her introductory remarks, that those governments who understand that there is a differential impact of COVID on women and then deliberately take a gender lens to ensuring that recovery and sustainability policies actually address the whole community and don't leave anyone behind. Those governments right now, I would say, have a kind of early start in ensuring that the value of what they're doing is going to be enduring. Just stop there.
Great, thank you, Penny. Really good 3 insights in terms of what can be successful. Sandra, a question for you in terms of, you talked about you're in a very male-dominated industry in both that Samsung and Woodside, and women make up a very small proportion of leadership positions there. You talked about some of the things you put in place as a young mother that you've seen continue on within Samsung and Korean business. How have you really navigated your way through this issue over your career to get where you are today?
Well, Korea is a relatively young nation, and it has grown its economic development in a very fast way, and many sectors that women have been left behind in terms of inclusion. As I meet today with some of my male counterparties and business partners, I try to keep the distance, and then there is one more layer for me to. I carry my position because of my competencies and capabilities, and there is no difference because I'm a female. So it is not fair for me to go through that extra layer of proving stage, but unfortunately that's where we are today. However, it's much, much better than 10 or 20 years ago. The social acceptance level of women to the business sector has improved very much. And more women participation, I believe, will not only benefit economically because there is a huge potential of human resources that we are not including in our social development, but also it will make a society to accept this as a norm. So we won't have such a day called International Women's Day because we will just be as equally perceived as and appreciated as an individual based on the capability and competencies.
Great, thank you so much, Sandra. Thanks for sharing that. I think one thing that's really, really clear that's come out that when women lead, and the ambassador talked about some of the financial statistics, we do see positive results. And we've seen that some of the most efficient and exemplary responses to the COVID-19 pandemic were led by women. And I think New Zealand and Taiwan have been held up as really great examples. And women, especially young women, are at the forefront of diverse and inclusive movements online and in the streets for social justice, climate change and equality. Yet women under 30 are less than 1% of parliamentarians worldwide, given the movement. Why do you think this is? Has anyone got any thoughts in terms of this movement of young, passionate women, but we see hardly any in these government or influential positions? Helen, you're a young woman. You're one of those.
I'll speak for my generation. I can only really speak from my experience and those immediately around me. I find that politics and also in policy place, it's quite a crowded space. And to be heard, you need to have either an outrageous view or a very agreeable view, or know someone who can champion your cause. As a younger woman coming through the ranks, I find that trying to make that connection as well as excel in my job, I'm quite time poor. And so that's why I think I'm trying to connect more with other champions in Korea, in Australia, and across the world, to support each other in that cause and to celebrate small and big wins, but also at the same time almost have an ongoing, irregular, informal and sometimes formal workshops where we can do that better as younger women.
Great, thank you, Helen. Yes, Penny.
Could I just jump in really briefly and say, I think it's not just politics, but the question of where women do choose to participate is sometimes about the culture of organisations and the perception of accessibility And the notion really as to whether women will flourish in that environment or not. And I think that, as Helen's just pointed out, many young women kind of make an assessment and then say, well, maybe I can deliver more impact, outside the system, or I can deliver more impact by setting up my own organization with like-minded voices. I think without wanting to dive too deeply into it, it's interesting that while some countries, including Korea, have actually, and some of the political parties in Australia have set either targets or quotas for women's participation, we haven't seen a big uptake of roles in politics by women. So I'll just leave it there.
Yes, Ambassador, you had something to add.
I think Helen and Penny have both put it very well, but maybe just to offer another perspective on this from the Australian government's viewpoint, and that is absolutely we recognise the importance of promoting women's leadership and decision making through our region, through our overseas development cooperation program. So our Partnerships for Recovery, as we call it, is very much focused on supporting our region recover and build back better from COVID-19. And certainly promoting women's leadership in politics and decision making is a really important theme of that. So we're actively looking for targeted interventions and ways that we could support greater female participation in those leadership positions throughout our region as a way of trying to promote a flow through, more women coming through the system. The other aspects of this program, just briefly while I have it, is picking up one of Penny's points. Women's economic empowerment is so important. We've seen time and time again that the more we can do to empower women economically by making sure that they have the opportunities to run a small business or to be economically literate in how they approach their life, just pays dividends over and over again throughout every country. Our focus particularly on our region, but the results are very much there. The third thing we're really working on is gender-based violence, and that is just too important not to be a part of. It'd probably be remiss of me not to say that your starting point, your question about why we're not seeing more young women in politics is obviously a very live issue in Australia at the moment. There is a very, as you'd be aware, a very active debate around a number of issues that have arisen in public life, centred on Parliament House in recent times. So I don't think I can ignore that. And there's obviously a lot there to work through and reflect on. I guess one positive approach I put on that is it sparks a conversation, and having people think about these issues and talk about them is an important first step to addressing them. So I try and take hope from some of the stories that are hitting the headlines at the moment, and hope that we will see some change for the better. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Ambassador. I agree. I think it's really important for that conversation to start and be out in the public, as uncomfortable as it makes people feel. Just before we throw to the audience questions, because we're going to do that very soon, Penny, you referred to innovation in your opening remarks and how women can play a really key role moving forward as we recover from COVID-19 and innovation. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts further on that.
Thanks very much, Jo. And I just want to ground these observations in by noting that one of the things that's been so much a feature of the pandemic period has been the acceleration of the digital economy. And that has just led to some fantastic productivity gains. It's led to greater connection. Look at all of us, we're in different countries, we're connecting on important topics, our audience is actually regional. It's been amazing, but actually technology hasn't just been about more Zoom calls. It's actually been fundamentally enabling in every aspect of life in new ways. Access to education, technology involved in developing systems for navigating COVID, from national apps, tracking apps to the whole medical science work that's been done on management and vaccines. And most importantly, as supply chains have been fragmented. We've seen the acceleration of e-commerce and the role of digital platforms in facilitating global commercial relationships. One of the very interesting things about innovation is while we've made some really great gains in women's leadership, STEM is still an area where women are dramatically underrepresented, both as graduates, in the workforce, in numbers, and we talk about this in our new report, numbers of research papers produced by women, number of IP applications. And if the future is going to be more digital, and digital is going to be core to enabling our economies and our lives, I think there is a really big opportunity and, in fact, a huge demonstrable need for thinking differently about how we encourage more women or young women into STEM and how we support those in careers that are either technology focused or digital economy focused going forward. Thanks, Jo.
Great, thanks, Penny. And I guess, Sandra, interested in your thoughts too, given Korea has ranked highly in the Innovation Index consistently over the last, I think, 3, 4, 5 years. Do we see women coming up in those ranks as well from a tech and STEM, or is it still a very male-dominated industry? I'm not sure if you can answer, but if you've had exposure to the industry.
Yes, the IT industry, Korea has very strong, and there are lots of significant size of IT companies in Korea, where more and more of my college friends and acquaintances, like people, more women in leadership in those IT companies have leadership positions that's for women, and it's good to see. But I don't have exact statistics for the IT industry, but yes, it is nice to see more women coming into the board in those sectors as well.
Great, thank you, Sandra. All right, we might throw to some of the questions that have come in from the audience, and please feel free to enter more questions in the Q&A tab. There's a question here from Tanya who said, how do you respond to those who don't believe in targets or quotas because it goes against their view of meritocracy? I think, Penny, do you want to take that one for us?
Thanks, Jo. Quotas and targets is always a really hard sort of debate. I think at the end of the day, many of our organisations have chosen to go with targets because targets, rather than hard quotas, do provide you a focus and a guideline, but actually underpinning targets is the notion of meritocracy. That is, at the end of the day, the best person has got to be the right person for the job. And I would speak on behalf, I'm sure, of many women who would say that it would be unfortunate if any of us were given a job simply, as a box ticking exercise, and because we were required to be part of a quota, rather than because we were able to bring the intrinsics to the table. The ambassador made a really important point around targets and the importance of reflecting always on who we are putting into roles and having guidance, having diverse, selection panels, having processes that actively put diversity at the fore. But at the end of the day, no one wants to think that they got a job simply because of a particular quota. So my personal view is when we start talking about targets and quotas, we have to acknowledge there's an important difference between the two, and that if we want to be respected and we want to take a merit-based approach, ultimately, it's important to keep in mind.
Yes, definitely agree. Does anyone else want to comment on the targets or quotas? I think they're really, really good points, Penny. Yes, Ambassador.
Maybe just briefly, completely endorse Penny's points, and it's very much about increasing the field. So it's about, by having these stretch targets in place, you encourage more women, more people of diverse backgrounds to put themselves forward. So then you have actually a higher quality field of candidates for a selection to be made. And then combined with the reference I made to unconscious bias training, you're also opening the mind of decision makers to actively think beyond the stereotype of who might have been the automatic person for that role. So it's really about encouraging both people to put themselves forward and decision makers to have a wider reflection on the choice that's made. But I'm absolutely confident that it does lead to the best person for the role. Thanks.
Thanks, Sandra, for that. Yes. There's a question around male champions of change, and it has been shown, I've done a bit of research in this space, that men as advocates and champions of change has actually been recognised as a major trend in accelerating women's equality. So I guess, Helen, a question for you. Have you had a male sponsor, advocate or champion that has supported you through your career, or have you seen it work effectively anywhere?
Yeah, there are male champions in my broader professional circle, but also within the embassy and also within Austrade. For example, I work with another trade commissioner who's male, and he has daughters who are moving through the ranks as well. So it's having him speak for not just his portfolio, but for my interests and for my portfolio as well, when there are opportunities to either present or engage in senior level meetings. That works really well for him and for me, and I'm always appreciative of his actions. Also within Austrade, there are senior executives who I regularly catch up with, who relate my stories to their wives and to their daughters. I think it's making that women in leadership, the gender inequality story, personal to the male counterparts and male champions for change, so that it becomes a personal cause and personal target for them as well to reduce the inequality. I think that's something that's worked well for me so far, and something I'll continue to do for myself and those around me.
Great, thanks, Helen. Anyone else seen it work really well in organisations or country in terms of having that male advocate? Because we're looking for tips on what the men want to know what they can do to help us.
I think, the Australian Male Champions for Change, and there's been Male Champions for Change groups set up now in many countries in the region, including Singapore. By choosing to actually label yourself as a champion, that in itself is actually incredibly empowering. And the fact that men are still often the most senior decision makers in organizations, if men can step in and declare their support, then adopt some of the approaches that the ambassador has spoken about in thinking about, human resource management, so selection and promotion and training and development, and then play an important mentoring and sponsoring role. Sponsorship being quite different to mentorship, actually reaching in and actively supporting women's careers. I think those sorts of steps can make a profound difference in, just by showing up every day in what we just, what are really basic processes at work, but thinking consciously and prompting others to do that. I love the if not, why not question that the ambassador mentioned. Even just asking that of your colleagues all the time.
Yeah, great point, Penny.
I might jump in and add to what Penny has just said. The panel pledge actually goes a long way in physical events and digital events as well. So male champions of change pledging to not speak at events where there are not gender diversity represented on the panel. I think that communicates a strong message within Australia and also in other countries as well.
Right. Thanks, Helen. Maybe we should have had males on this panel so we pre-pledge too. All right, there's not much time left. There was a question and people did say they're interested in personal stories, and someone asked, as parents, how do you guys balance such a full career and your children at the same time to sort of get to where you are today? How do you manage to do that? Because I know there is this concept of the M curve here in Korea where we drop off the workforce when there are young mothers. So I guess there's a few parents on the panel here today. So Sandra, do you want to start?
Yes, the family support and equal equally accepting your wife's career is it's very, very important. And also the company policies help for females to stay in the workplace. For example, when I worked for Samsung, they provided a nursery care service in the same building. So physically being able to be very close and knowing that I can always run to them immediately, even I was working a heavy hours. It was very comforting, and that was a great example of a policy which companies and governments can provide support for women to come out to their workplaces. And also having supportive family, your husband, if you have a male champion husband, that will definitely help your career to continue and excel.
Great, thank you, Sandra. And I guess both the ambassador and Penny, you've travelled a lot all over the place, I'm sure, with and without your children. Can you share some of your personal strategies or ways that you've managed to juggle the two? I'll go to Ambassador first.
Thank you. Would endorse Sandra's points. Having a partner who is strongly supportive of your career and your work aspirations is certainly been hugely important in my case. I'm on my 5th overseas posting, and I wouldn't have been able to. I've had 4 of them with children, so I wouldn't have been able to do that without the support of my husband and partner. The workplace practices really do make a difference, and they've evolved in my 27 years of working for the Australian government. And I think that's an enormously positive approach. I think it's really important to have both men and women accessing those flexible processes, flexible work, access to childcare on site, etc. So it becomes less of a women issue, quote unquote, and more of an everyone issue. How we can all make sure that we're contributing to our maximum potential, whatever stage of life we're in and whatever job we're in. So certainly when I was a manager back in Canberra, I was always encouraging applications for flexible working practices from my men as much as from my women employees, and was actually at the point where I had more men working flexibly than women, which sends exactly the right sort of message in moving beyond this being seen as just something for women. Apart from that, I'd say personally ruthless prioritisation and making sure that I was always on the job and getting it done, so that I was getting the maximum out of every hour in the office. But I think that's a very common experience of many women. And finally, I think we'll have success when we stop being asked about being working mothers, because no one refers to working fathers. So when we can get to that point in the conversation, I think we'll be in a good place. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Ambassador. Now we've only got 2 minutes left. Should we do one more question, or do we need to close? I'm looking to the boxes. We will. There's one more interesting question. We'll just quickly do it. What do the panelists feel are some of the most commonly held assumptions about the status of women in Korea by Australians and vice versa? And of these, which do you think we can choose to challenge? So I guess what are some of those assumptions that Australian women have about Koreans and vice versa? Has anyone got any insights on this one? You get help? Oh, yes, go, Ambassador.
I would just say the one that I'm actively choosing to challenge is the perception that there are no women available for meetings. So Helen's story is very, very common. I'm frequently being invited to meetings or organising meetings where everyone on the other side of the table is a mister. So we've taken the approach similar to the panel pledge of just gently inquiring about are there any women that might be qualified to be a part of this meeting, and letting it be known that that's part of how we like to work, and it's already reaping some early results. So that's one way that we're hopefully making a small difference. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Ambassador. Helen, did you have something to add?
That's actually what I was going to say. So I'm lucky to be working under all-female leadership in the embassy. When we put on events, there's an assumption that all the decision makers will be male. For example, I'm hoping to organise a wine masterclass or wine pairing event with, major VIPs. But, when we go around the room in the embassy and compile a stakeholder list, they're all male. And so actually prodding our locally engaged staff to think about which 2ICs who are female emerging leaders can we engage as the embassy, engage at high levels so that, you know, there's more, I guess, momentum created across both our public sector, private sector in both of our markets as well.
Great, thanks, Helen. That brings us to out of time. So thank you all for your questions and engagement, and also thank you so much to all the panelists. But I will throw it to Rowan to close for us. Rowan.
Yes, no, thank you very much, everyone. It's been a fantastic session today. I've personally learned a lot, and I've got some great takeaways that I'll be trying to adopt and move forward with. I'd like to first thank our partners at the event, Asialink Business, and also the Australian Embassy in Seoul, and all our panelists, Ambassador Raper, Penny Burt, Sandra Park, and Helen Oh, for all your time and insights into this topic. And I look forward to catching up with you all soon. For those who are attending, thank you very much. I do encourage you to be sure to engage with us further on social media, and encourage you to visit our website for upcoming events. Once again, thank you very much, and look forward to speaking to you soon.